Well, is this idea of the global heartland the answer to America's woes? Let's find out, why don't we? Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and my friend Alfonso Rachel sitting in for Scott Ott, who's a little under the weather today. And gentlemen saw something in Instapundit, which, as all of you know, can be contributed to by any dolt can write whatever they want to on Instapundit, right, Steve? There was an article there talking about something, and it was the term that I found interesting, and it was a referral to something called the global heartland. And the idea is that larger percentages of legal immigrants into the country, I suppose illegal ones too for that matter, there are fewer and fewer of them are spending time in cities and when I say ghettos, I don't mean ghettos necessarily in the derogatory sense of the word. I'm talking about a small enclosed community in this sense. For the history of most of the history of American immigration, certainly during the entire 20th century, you would have large groups of immigrants coming to America, and they would enter into a city, a point of entry, New York being the classic one, and they'd form little ghettos, and that would be there'd be little China, and there'd be little Tokyo, there'd be little Italy, and so on and so on and so on, where that ethnic identity is not only maintained in a way, it's almost like exaggerated. But what the latest demographics are showing is that more and more immigrants are moving directly into America's heartland, into the suburbs, the exurbs, and actually out into rural areas. And I happen to think this is just great. I think it's absolutely great. I think it's great for two reasons. Steve, let me start with you. One of the reasons I think it's great is because if you take all of the vices of America's urban decay, which basically all these areas have been run by Democrats for 80 years, 90 years now. If you take the poverty rates out, if you take the education scores out, if you take the gun violence out and so on, if you take the gun violence out from these democratically controlled cities, America's murder rate is lower than Belgium's. And so if immigrants are moving to a place where America is still this, at least the image of what we conservatives think it is, that's nothing but good news, isn't it?
It really, really is. And not just politically, culturally, too. And I think I want to talk about the cultural part more than I want to talk about the political part. Assimilation has always been the American genius for accepting newcomers. You know, you could move to France and live there for 30 years and learn to speak the language fluently and love all your neighbors and all that. You'll never be a Frenchman. Exactly. Same thing, any other country in the world. I don't care if it's China, Japan, South Africa, India, it doesn't matter. You'll never become one of them. In America, we're an imperfect people just like everybody else. We may not always welcome you with open arms. We've had some ugly history there. But in the end, assimilation has always worked, not just for immigrants, but for the broader American public. It's genius. I can't imagine this country. You know, they said, Italians can never assimilate into this country. Can you imagine this country if we hadn't let Italians in? No Italian food. Oh my God, it would be miserable. I don't even want to think about it. Just so much cultural richness that we have in this melting pot of just wonderful madness. I just love it. When I was living in San Francisco, there was a noodle shop in Chinatown. I thought, I'll never get noodles as good as that after I leave San Francisco. And guess what? I can get noodles pretty much that good right here in tiny little Monument, Colorado. There was a sushi place I used to go to in the city, too, that I thought, I'll never get sushi as good as that when I moved to Colorado. There's a place called June's with a Z in Parker, Colorado. How many people watching the show or on the show have ever heard of Parker, Colorado? This place, June's, has sushi every bit as good as I ever got in San Francisco with its Japanese community. So this kind of spread to the suburbs and the exurbs has been going on for a long time. And this is what gets us to the political part, because I think it's accelerating now, or currently it is accelerating as the numbers show. And the thing is, the cities have always been, for Bill, the reasons you were talking about, the places where immigrants go first to build their own communities before assimilating. Well, those cities, every single one of them is run by Democrats and has been run by Democrats for a very long time. We're talking decades and decades in most cases, New York being the exception with Rudy Giuliani. But, he's been out a long time now. And it's a record of failure in every single one of these cities. The blue model has failed. And it hasn't just failed Americans who have been here for hundreds of years. It's failed the immigrants. They don't like the increasing murder rates any more than anybody else does. They don't like the riots any more than anybody else does. So they're coming out to the heartland. And all I can say is welcome, thank you, feed me.
The point you make about assimilation bears a little examination, Steve, because a lot of you hear progressives say that the entire idea of the melting pot means that your ethnic identity is destroyed, right? Oh. They want the salad where all of the parts are individual. Here's the lettuce, here's and it's a salad. The melting pot is the idea that no, it's like an alloy. But the thing about the melting pot is, yes, the American identity as a national identity remains the same, but when you add this new ingredient, it changes the flavor, but it doesn't completely change the flavor. It doesn't destroy the flavor. You don't have 15 different flavors. I just have to tell you, based on what you're talking about with ethnic food and stuff, I visited Australia in 1998, and I went to a Mexican restaurant in Australia, which was run by a red-faced sheep farmer who basically had a taco out of a box and put some pseudo ground beef on it and poured like a red sauce on it. And that wasn't really Mexican food. And then we went to get some Chinese food, which was also served by a red-faced sheep farmer who brought out noodles with like a clear red sauce to put on it. It wasn't Chinese food either. Yeah. Even in Australia, Kentucky Fried Chicken, instead of having 7 herbs and spices, it's got 3. And this is nothing but good. It's just that the American people have had so much illegal immigration shoved down their throat, and this cult of diversity has been input on top of people that we forget how great genuine voluntary diversity really is. As though I said, there were 2 reasons why I think this is really good for America. One of them is the sense of people developing those kind of heartland values. I think the other reason is the idea that cities tend to concentrate people into communities, and the toxicity has nothing to be compared to. For example, if somebody asked me what I would do about poor people in America, I would say I would distribute them. I would distribute them. If you have a bunch of people who are making bad decisions and they're all living cheek to jowl with each other, then not only do those negative qualities get amplified, but they simply have nothing to compare it to. Nothing to compare it to. I recall a story from a white guy, like a white Jewish guy in San Francisco, and he went to live in the projects. He went to live in the poorest of the poor. And you would just see time and time again that so many bad decisions. Somebody got a new sofa and they'd leave the old sofa in the hallway, and everybody had to step over the sofa for a year. And there's no one to show people that there's a better way to do these things. And so I really like the idea of taking areas that have been traditionally a real problem for America and diluting them with people who have just a different opinion on how to do things, better ways to do things. You are the product of your neighbors and the behaviors of your neighbors and the social proof and all that stuff.
Sure, man. And and just as long as people understand that that's why they're leaving for, not just to get away from where they are, but to, provide these ideas and stuff like that and these work ethics and whatnot. Because if they don't, and they just want to move just to get away and carry the same stuff into this new place, then the heartland is just going to be a place with heart disease. The heartland is going to have heart disease, man. and we don't want any of that. Because it's just like a lot of, like even with the illegal immigration. Immigration is beautiful, man. And immigration is great, but you got to do it the right way. If not, people end up bringing the same problems that they were trying to get away from in the first place. And, Perfect. And the land can get eaten up pretty fast. It's like you can have neighbors like a ways away, but you start getting into making these policies that you want, and then all of a sudden it's going to start to feel pretty cramped, even though your neighbor is like way over there if you have to abide by these things. I think folks need to understand that, where they are, people are dealing with having a hard times making ends meet, trying to achieve their dreams and all that sort of stuff. And, their dollar's not going that far, and they see themselves as the poor getting poorer, as the rich are getting richer. And the rich that they see getting richer are the Democrats who, had the positions of influence in their cities, but it goes against what the Lord has said. It's like, look, man, you guys are always going to have the poor with you. Always. It doesn't mean that people are doomed to stay poor. It just means you're always going to have the poor. And one of the reasons why you're always going to have the poor is that you're always going to have people who are going to try to capitalize on your plight, try to capitalize on your poverty. And they will do because they're dependent on you, either for votes or either for money. And they're going to pander to you, and they're going to make sure that you keep this mindset. So you're going to have these people, if people don't escape from that mindset first, you got to escape from the mindset, because if they don't, you can go ahead and escape from your city. You're just going to take that same mindset to someplace else, and you're going to infect that city too, or that rural area, whichever.
There's actually kind of almost like mathematics behind why this is a good idea, and why immigrants moving more towards the country than to the cities is really good for America. There is actually almost like a mathematical formula behind it. Nobody really gets down to the brass tacks, but the fundamental vector, the fundamental mechanism of the toxicity of the inner cities of any big cities in America is anonymity. That's why you get away with what you get away with. If you mug somebody on the streets of a small town in America, you're mugging somebody you know, and you're doing it in front of people you know, and the people who see the mugging know who you are, and they know how to come after you, and so on. The reason cities are such hotbeds of crime is because of the anonymity. You can go into a subway station, you can see somebody you've never seen before and you will never see again. You can put a gun to them and they will give you your money, and you've got a pretty good sense that they're not going to be able to find you out there in the millions of people that are just flowing by at any given time. The beautiful thing about this idea of this sort of global heartland is that in areas that are not cities, you have a reputation, and you have a reputation. It means people know who to avoid and who not to avoid. The reason I said there's a bit of a mathematical background to this is because of a thought experiment called the prisoner's dilemma. And you really should look it up, because I'm not going to go into all of the detail of it. But basically, the idea of the prisoner's dilemma is you've got two prisoners, and a deal is made with each of them saying, if you rat the other guy out, you will suffer less punishment. But if both of you are true, then you'll suffer no punishment. Well, as you run this again and again and again, what you find is that it's the smart play to rat the other person out. But that's only true if you do it once. If you don't know who you're playing against, the smart play is to betray that person. That's the best way to victory. And you can run a computer, run it millions of times, and that's what you get. However, there's something called the iterated prisoner's dilemma, where you are now dealing with somebody the same time again and again. In other words, you're dealing with somebody that has a reputation. And when you're dealing with somebody who has a reputation, somebody who maybe has betrayed you before, and there's a bit of a story here, then the best outcome changes from screw the other guy. And the best outcome becomes something called tit for tat, which means that don't screw the other guy. If he screws you, screw him back, and keep screwing him back until he stops screwing you, at which point you stop screwing him again. And this is the optimum outcome for people once you know that there's a reputation. I'm not going to mess with you. I'm going to be honest with you. You're going to be honest with me. Everybody wins. If you start to mess with me, I've got to hit you back, because if I don't, you're going to keep taking advantage of me. But if I hit you back and then you stop doing these bad things, then we can go back to winning again. There's a mathematical truth to it. And for the prisoner's dilemma to produce the outcome of, hey, let's all just get along and let's all just do well, there has to be a reputation. You have to know who you're dealing with and what kind of person that is. This doesn't exist in the inner cities, which is why, going back to Jefferson understood that the problem with cities was the anonymity of it. I don't know anything about this person that is standing next to me. All of this simply to say that the democratic and demographic trends that the Democrats are so fond of seem to be actually blowing up in their faces. Not only are fewer and fewer people coming to live in the inner cities, more and more people, not just the inner cities, are leaving cities, period. And this is the miracle of the internet. The internet allows us to do business in areas where we don't all have to be together. It's not an industrial era where all these factories have to ship stuff from one place to another. If you're a graphic designer, you can live in Colorado as easily as you can in Los Angeles. And this dispersal into neighborhoods with real people and real reputations is something that the Democrats and the progressives cannot control, and it is the death sentence for progressivism, which is, in fact, an industrial era philosophy whose time has come and long, long gone. Good riddance to all of them, I say, and the poisons they bring with them. For Steve Green and our friend Alfonso Rachel, we hope Scott's feeling better soon. I'm Bill Whittle. We'll see you next time right here on Right Angle.